Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk about a phenomenon many have witnessed, few understand, and even fewer talk about openly: why women always come back. Now, before you jump to conclusions, this is not about manipulation or control. It's about connection, growth, and the human experience. It's about understanding what lies beneath the surface when someone leaves, reflects, and often returns. Emotional memory is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. And for women, it often plays a central role in decisions around love, connection, and returning to past relationships. While facts fade and timelines blur, how someone made you feel lingers far longer than most people realize. For women, whose emotional intelligence and relational awareness are often deeply intuitive, the emotional imprint of a relationship can last for years, even lifetimes. This doesn't mean that every emotional memory is positive, but the ones that felt profound, moments of being deeply seen, valued, and emotionally safe, tend to leave a mark that's hard to forget. These emotional imprints are not accidental. They are built in subtle, repeated moments. A shared laugh in the middle of a fight, a gentle touch when the world felt harsh, a glance that said, "I see you," when no words were spoken. All of these build emotional currency. Over time, they create a mental archive of experiences that the heart refers back to when deciding whether something was real, meaningful, and worth revisiting. It's not always the grand gestures that stick. More often, it's the consistent emotional presence and safety that echo in the mind long after physical separation. Women also tend to internalize relational experiences more deeply because society often conditions them to be the emotional caretakers in relationships. They remember not just what happened, but why it mattered. They catalog the feelings, both good and bad, with sharp clarity. When they walk away, they may seem resolute on the surface, but inside, those emotional memories can continue to stir reflection and reconsideration. It's not weakness, it's depth. And it's that depth that causes women to circle back, even if just mentally, to a relationship that once made them feel alive, appreciated, or understood. There's also a physiological element to emotional memory. Neuroscience shows that emotional experiences engage multiple regions of the brain, especially the amygdala, which processes emotions, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory. When these systems are activated together during intense emotional experiences, whether joyful or painful, they create stronger neural connections. This is why certain relationships, even if short-lived, can remain vivid in memory. Women, often more attuned to their emotional states, are more likely to feel the weight of these connections in the long term. Furthermore, emotional memory isn't always conscious. A woman might find herself dreaming about someone from her past, or feeling unexpectedly emotional when hearing a certain song, or revisiting a familiar place. These triggers are reminders that emotional bonds don't dissolve on a schedule. They operate on their own timeline, often surfacing long after the relationship has ended. And in some cases, they bring with them a yearning to revisit the relationship, to see if the emotional connection still lives in the present. Of course, not all emotional memories lead to reconciliation. Sometimes they serve as cautionary tales, reminding her of what she endured and why she left. But when the emotional memories were rooted in genuine love, respect, and connection, they can be compelling enough to override ego, pride, or even logic. Women will often weigh that emotional history against their present reality, and if the balance leans toward what we had was real, that's when the thought of going back starts to feel justified. In this way, emotional memory becomes a compass. It doesn't always point toward the past, but it does influence how a woman perceives her path. It informs her choices, reframes her narratives, and sometimes nudges her to revisit a chapter she once thought was closed. Because for women, relationships are not just experiences, They are emotional landscapes. And once something has left a meaningful mark on that landscape, it rarely disappears completely. One of the most overlooked reasons women return to past relationships is the presence of unfinished emotional business. While the term may sound clinical, its impact is deeply personal and often haunting. It refers to the emotional questions left unanswered, the feelings never expressed, the apologies never given, and the closure that was never achieved. When a relationship ends abruptly or without proper communication, it can leave a woman in a state of emotional suspension, carrying unresolved weight that continues to whisper long after the final goodbye. This lingering sense of incompletion can be powerful enough to draw her back, not out of weakness, but in search of emotional clarity. Women are often taught to prioritize emotional honesty and depth. They are conditioned by society, family, and experience to process, nurture, and even heal emotional wounds. So when a relationship ends without a real conversation, or when the story feels incomplete, it can feel unnatural to simply move on. The emotional part of her mind seeks resolution, not just escape. She wants to understand what happened, why it happened, and what it meant. That search for meaning is often what drives her to return, not because she can't let go of the person, but because she hasn't yet made peace with the experience. Unfinished emotional business can take many forms. Sometimes it's a conversation that was avoided out of fear or ego. Sometimes it's a truth she never got to tell, or a question she was too afraid to ask. It can even be as simple and as complicated as not knowing how the other person truly felt. The lack of closure creates a psychological vacuum, and our minds, especially emotionally attuned minds, are wired to try and fill those gaps. For women, this can mean revisiting the relationship to bring emotional balance back to a story that still feels unresolved. It's important to understand that this isn't about regret, it's about resolution. There's a big difference between wanting to rekindle a flame and wanting to extinguish a lingering question. A woman may come back not to restart the relationship, but to look you in the eyes and ask, was any of that real? Or why didn't we fight harder for what we had? These are not easy questions. They come from a place of vulnerability and courage. And even though they can reopen emotional wounds, they are also a form of emotional self-respect, an insistence on not walking away from a story unfinished. This need for emotional completion can be intensified if the relationship ended during a time of chaos, conflict, or immaturity. When people grow, they begin to see the past differently. With more perspective and emotional maturity, a woman might realize that the way things ended didn't reflect the full truth of what she felt or needed. That realization often sparks a desire to return, not to relive the pain, but to finally understand it, face it, and put it in its proper place. Closure is not just a moment, it's a process. And for many women, that process sometimes includes going back. The power of unfinished business also lies in its unpredictability. It can remain buried for months or years, only to rise again during moments of emotional vulnerability or change. Starting a new relationship, losing someone, going through personal transformation. These life events can reignite the emotional need to make peace with the past, and when that happens, the call to return to someone once loved can feel almost unavoidable. It's not about holding on. It's about letting go the right way. Even when there's no expectation of a future, resolving unfinished emotional business can be a form of healing. It allows a woman to reclaim her voice, reframe her story, and move forward with emotional clarity. It's not about reopening wounds for the sake of drama. It's about closing them with dignity. In a world that often encourages people to just move on, women who come back to resolve what was left unsaid are not weak. They are brave enough to face what most people run from. Time has a way of reshaping perspective, especially after the end of a relationship. When a woman walks away from someone or something, it's often because she needs distance, not just physical, but emotional and mental. In that space, something powerful begins to happen: growth. She starts to reflect, to untangle her thoughts from the noise of conflict, hurt, or confusion. And with that reflection often comes a surprising twist, a renewed understanding of what she had, what went wrong, and what, if anything, is still worth revisiting. This process of inner development is rarely rushed, but it can be one of the most transformative reasons she comes back. In the midst of a breakup, it's easy to make emotionally charged decisions. Hurt and pride often drown out love and logic. But as time passes and emotions settle, a woman often begins to see the situation with clearer eyes. She asks herself different questions, not just, why did he hurt me, but why did I react that way? Or what was my role in the breakdown? This self-awareness can shift her entire narrative. She may realize that some of what she thought was unforgivable was actually misunderstood, or that her own healing has opened her up to a deeper form of connection. Personal growth isn't always linear. It often comes through unexpected channels: therapy, new relationships, solitude, creative expression, or simply age. As a woman evolves, her capacity for empathy, understanding, and forgiveness often expands. She begins to see not just her own wounds, but the humanity in the person she once loved. That doesn't erase past pain, but it reframes it. In that reframing, a door sometimes opens. A quiet question appears: what if there's still something worth salvaging now that I'm not the same person who left? Growth also means shedding illusions. Sometimes women leave relationships thinking they can easily find better elsewhere: more attention, more consistency, more passion. But with time and maturity, they often realize that real connection is rare, and that what they had might have been more special than they recognized in the moment. This isn't about settling. It's about realizing that no relationship is perfect, and that some flaws can be worked through if the foundation was genuine. Coming back, in this case, is not regression. It's choosing again, but with wiser eyes. Reflection also brings accountability. A woman who has grown no longer sees herself as just a victim of a failed relationship. She starts to take ownership of her own actions, words, and emotional defenses. Maybe she shut down when she should have spoken up. Maybe she walked away too quickly. Maybe she demanded change before modeling it herself. When this kind of honesty surfaces, it naturally stirs a desire to revisit what was lost, not to beg or chase, but to make peace with the version of herself who didn't know better at the time. Growth also reshapes desires. A woman who once needed validation from a partner may grow into someone who seeks emotional partnership rooted in mutual respect. That shift can make her view a past relationship differently, especially if she sees that her partner has grown too. In this case, coming back isn't about filling an old space with the same behaviors. It's about building something new on higher ground. Reflection reveals the lessons, but growth gives her the tools to apply them differently the second time around. The desire to return after real inner growth is often quiet and humbling. It doesn't come from longing or loneliness, but from alignment. She doesn't come back seeking what was. She comes back curious about what could be now that she knows herself better. That's why time apart can be so vital. It allows both people to evolve beyond the noise of the past, to do their separate healing, and possibly to meet again, not as who they were, but as who they've become. In a world overflowing with options, endless scrolling, and superficial interactions, one truth often becomes painfully clear: genuine connection is rare. It's easy to meet people, to flirt, to text back and forth, to go on a date, But it's much harder to feel seen, to feel truly understood, emotionally safe, and spiritually aligned with another human being. Is not something that happens every day. When a woman experiences this type of deep connection, one that feels rooted, authentic, and soul touching, it stays with her. And sometimes, even if she walks away from it, she finds herself pulled back toward it, not out of habit, but because her heart knows she hasn't found anything like it since. At the time of the relationship, this rarity may not be fully recognized. When you're in the middle of something real, you can take it for granted. You assume that if it felt this good once, it will feel that good again with someone else. But after walking away, especially when navigating the emotional wasteland of surface level connections, many women realize that what they had wasn't ordinary. The way they laughed together, the way silence felt comfortable, the way problems, though difficult, didn't erase the respect and emotional intimacy between them. Those things aren't just found on every corner. And when the woman realizes that, it can shift her entire understanding of the relationship she left behind. What makes rare connections so powerful is that they tap into the whole person. It's not just about shared interests or physical chemistry, though those may exist. It's the emotional resonance that creates a lasting imprint. It's the feeling of being understood without having to over-explain, of being able to let your guard down and still feel safe, of knowing that even when things got hard, there was a deep emotional current that held everything together. That type of bond becomes a benchmark for everything that follows, and often nothing quite compares. In the dating world, especially today, there's an overwhelming amount of attention, but a lack of intention. It's common to feel replaceable, to be part of someone's rotation, or to have deep conversations one day and be ghosted the next. Over time, these experiences erode trust and make the heart cautious. So when a woman compares these fragmented encounters with a connection that once felt whole, warm, and emotionally honest, the contrast can be jarring. And that contrast is often what brings her back, not because the past was perfect, but because it was real, and real is rare. Women, more than most, are sensitive to emotional authenticity. They can sense when someone is faking interest, giving just enough to keep them close, but never enough to build anything meaningful. So when they remember a relationship where vulnerability was welcome, where emotional depth was reciprocated, they don't forget it. Even if they left out of pain, confusion, or timing issues, the memory of being met on that deep emotional level doesn't fade. And if they return, it's often in search of that emotional honesty because it's something they've come to realize they deeply value and can't easily find elsewhere. The rarity of a connection becomes even more clear when a woman starts to do inner work. As she becomes more self-aware, she begins to understand which parts of the relationship were reflections of her own growth and which parts were mirrors of something deep in both people. This understanding often reframes her past in a new light. She sees that what she had wasn't just love, it was alignment. And alignment, that sense of emotional, mental, and even spiritual synchronicity, is not something that appears often. That realization alone can stir a powerful desire to revisit what was once shared. And so rare connections, the kind that make a woman feel emotionally alive, spiritually engaged, and mentally stimulated, are not easily walked away from forever. Time may pass, distance may grow, but the emotional memory of what it felt like to be that connected to another human being lingers. It becomes a quiet reference point, a deep question, and eventually it can become a reason to return, not to chase a fantasy, but to reconnect with something that felt uniquely unmistakably and undeniably real. One of the most compelling reasons a woman might return to a past relationship is the undeniable evidence that change is possible. While the initial breakup may have stemmed from immaturity, emotional unavailability, or unresolved issues, time has a way of creating distance, not just between people, but between who they were and who they have the potential to become. When a woman sees genuine growth in the person she once loved, when she senses that he has evolved in ways she once longed for, something shifts. Hope returns, curiosity awakens, and the question emerges, could this work now that things are different? Women don't usually expect perfection. What they value more deeply is the willingness to change, to grow, and to confront one's shortcomings. Often, during a relationship, frustrations mount when change seems impossible. When conversations go in circles, apologies feel shallow, and actions remain unchanged. But when time apart leads to personal transformation, when the man she once loved starts taking responsibility, building emotional awareness, and demonstrating consistency, she notices. Quietly, she notices. And that noticing can slowly open a door she once thought was closed for good. Change isn't just about external behaviors. It's also about emotional depth. Maybe he used to avoid vulnerability, but now he expresses his feelings with clarity. Maybe he used to dismiss her concerns, but now he listens with presence and patience. These aren't just small improvements, they're signs of emotional evolution. And women, being highly attuned to emotional energy, can feel when a man's growth is real. It shows up in his words, in his tone, in how he carries himself. It's not about saying the right things, it's about being the right person now in ways he wasn't before. Ironically, sometimes change becomes visible only after separation. Space forces people to confront their patterns, sit with their regrets, and ask themselves difficult questions. A man who truly reflects may come to understand what he lost, not just in her, but in himself when he wasn't ready. And if that change is authentic, it often radiates beyond him. Friends notice. His priorities shift. He becomes more grounded, more patient, more intentional. If and when a woman sees that shift, it challenges her assumptions. It makes her wonder whether the love they shared deserves a second look. But it's not just about his change. Her own growth plays a role too. Time apart often gives her clarity about her own flaws, her boundaries, and the way she communicated her needs. As she evolves, she gains a broader perspective, not just on the pain she experienced, but on the dynamics between them. If she sees that both of them have grown in parallel or even in complementary ways, it can spark a desire to explore what that growth might look like together. Change, in this context, becomes a bridge, not back to what they had, but forward to what they could now create. Change, when it's genuine, doesn't beg for attention. It speaks through consistency. A man who has truly transformed won't be desperate to win her back with words. He will embody the difference. He will respect her timing, her doubts, and even her hesitation. That level of emotional maturity itself can be a signal that he's no longer operating from a place of ego or fear, but from truth and readiness. And women, when they sense this shift, are often drawn to it, not out of nostalgia, but because they recognize the rarity of someone who not only claims change, but lives it. For women who once walked away because they saw no hope, witnessing change can feel like watching a new chapter being written. Not a repetition of old stories, but a fresh narrative grounded in mutual growth. While the past might still carry its weight, the present begins to offer something new. A sense that perhaps, just perhaps, the love they once had now has the maturity to survive. In those moments, returning is no longer about re-entering an old relationship, but about stepping into a new one with someone who's no longer who they used to be. Sometimes a woman comes back not because she needs love from someone else, but because she has finally remembered how deeply she needs to love herself. This is the powerful, often overlooked force of self-worth reclamation. When a woman leaves a relationship, especially one where she felt undervalued, unseen, or emotionally dismissed, the time apart is not just about grieving the loss. It becomes a journey of returning to herself. And interestingly, that internal journey can eventually lead her back to the very relationship she once walked away from, but this time with a completely different sense of power. When a woman loses herself in a relationship, it often happens slowly, quietly. She might begin to compromise her needs, silence her voice to avoid conflict, or prioritize someone else's happiness over her own. Over time, this self-abandonment erodes her confidence. Even if she doesn't consciously realize it, she starts to feel smaller, less worthy, or as if her value is conditional upon how much she gives. Walking away, then, is not just about leaving someone. It's about breaking a cycle of self-neglect. It's a radical act of self-respect, a declaration that she will no longer stay where she is, not fully honored. Once she's out of that emotional fog, the process of reclamation begins. At first, it's painful. The silence is loud, the questions are endless. But with each day of solitude, she begins to rebuild herself. She sets boundaries. She listens to her intuition. She returns to her passions, her friendships, her inner voice. And as she starts to feel herself again, something fundamental shifts. She realizes that her worth was never tied to how someone else treated her. It was always hers, buried maybe, but never lost. And once she reclaims it, she becomes a version of herself that is bolder, wiser, and emotionally grounded. It is from this place of reclaimed self-worth that some women choose to revisit a past relationship, not because they need saving, fixing, or proving, but because they are now strong enough to assess that relationship with clarity. They ask, was I truly mistreated? Or was I simply too unsure of my own value to ask for what I needed? They explore the possibility that their previous self accepted too little, not because the other person couldn't give more, but because she didn't yet believe she deserved more. That level of reflection doesn't lead to blame. It leads to choice, agency, and self-trust. When a woman returns from this place of wholeness, the dynamic shifts. She is no longer seeking love as validation. She is offering it as a gift. Her energy changes. She speaks differently. She asks different questions. She no longer tolerates emotional breadcrumbs or partial presence. She commands depth, accountability, and mutual respect. And if her former partner has also grown, he will feel this shift immediately and either rise to meet it or fall away from it. Either way, she will not chase. Her worth is no longer on the line. This form of return is not regression. It is reclamation. It is revisiting a past chapter, not to rewrite it, but to own it. To say, I am not who I was back then. To enter from a place of emotional fullness, not scarcity. And in doing so, a woman often brings a healing energy to the relationship, one that invites honesty, depth, and a new type of love that neither of them may have been ready for the first time around. This love is not desperate. It is not performative. It is grounded in self-acknowledge and emotional sovereignty. The beauty of self-worth reclamation is that it makes return optional, not obligatory. A woman who has reclaimed herself doesn't go back because she has to. She goes back because she wants to, chooses to, intends to. That difference is everything. Her return, if it happens, is not an act of dependence, but of empowered connection. It is a full circle moment, one where she knows exactly who she is, what she brings, and what she'll never settle for again. When a woman returns to a past relationship, many assume it means reconciliation. They interpret her reappearance as a sign that she wants to pick up where things left off, to rebuild what was broken, or to reattach to a familiar love. But not all returns mean stay. Sometimes returning is less about revival and more about resolution. It's not always about rekindling the romance. It's about reclaiming her peace, closing a loop, or seeking clarity for the sake of her own growth. And the return in these cases is not about attachment, it's about understanding. There are moments when a woman needs to look the past in the eye, not because she's stuck, but because she's finally strong enough to confront it. After time apart and self-reflection, she might feel drawn back, not out of longing, but out of completeness. She may want to revisit the relationship as the woman she has become, not the version of herself that left in confusion, pain, or silence. This type of return is purposeful. It's about asking questions she once avoided, expressing truth she never had the voice to speak, and rewriting the narrative with full awareness. Many times, closure is not something that can be achieved alone. It lives in the unsaid, in the emotional debris of misunderstandings, miscommunication, or trauma that was left unresolved. When a woman returns for closure, she's not necessarily looking to reignite anything. She's seeking freedom. She wants to free herself from assumptions, guilt, or lingering confusion. She wants to walk through the door again so she can finally close it, but with grace, certainty, and peace rather than anger or avoidance. Sometimes her return is simply to test the emotional waters, to see if time has healed both sides, to feel whether the energy has shifted. She may sense that the relationship no longer carries the same emotional charge it once did. The fire that once consumed her may now feel like a distant warmth, still present, but no longer pulling her under. And in that moment, she may realize she's no longer the same woman who cried for him, that she's stronger, more self-assured, and no longer emotionally dependent on how he responds. In other cases, a woman returns out of emotional curiosity, not because she wants to reattach, but because she wants to measure how far she's come. Reconnecting for a conversation, sharing space briefly, or observing how it feels to be near someone who once held her heart, these experiences can be deeply affirming. They show her how much she's healed, how differently she reacts, how much more she values herself. That insight alone can be more powerful than any romantic reunion. And for some, the return is about offering something, not asking for something. It could be forgiveness. It could be an apology. It could be acknowledgement of how they both hurt each other. When a woman initiates or accepts this type of reconnection, it's an emotional release, not a proposal to go back. Her ability to face the past without collapsing into it is a sign of emotional maturity. She knows that returning does not mean she belongs there, only that she's finally at peace with having once been there. Not all returns are hopeful. Some are deeply sobering. They reveal that what once felt like love was really control or codependency or illusion. And when she sees that with new eyes, her return becomes a rite of passage, the final lesson before she walks away for good. It's not a weakness, nor is it indecision. It is clarity in action. It's the realization that closure doesn't always come with distance. Sometimes it comes with standing exactly where the pain began and choosing with full strength not to stay this time. When a woman returns after time apart, she doesn't come back as the same person who left. Her silence, her absence, and her healing were not passive experiences. They were transformational. She has been rebuilding, reflecting, and relearning herself. The woman who returns is often wiser, more self-assured, and more aligned with her values. She's no longer operating from the wounds that shaped her reactions. or the insecurities that dictated her decision. She has evolved, and anyone expecting the old version of her is in for a surprise. Be prepared for a new version of her. The woman who once stayed quiet to keep the peace may now speak her mind without hesitation. She no longer fears that expressing her truth will drive someone away, because she has learned that her voice matters more than someone else's comfort. What was once interpreted as passive or agreeable was often her battling herself internally, unsure of how to hold space for her needs. But now she returns with boundaries, clear, firm, and non-negotiable. These boundaries aren't walls to shut people out. They are filters to protect her peace. She's no longer afraid to disappoint others if it means honoring herself. Emotionally, this new version of her is more grounded. Where she once reacted out of anxiety or fear of abandonment, she now pauses, reflects, and chooses her responses. This doesn't mean she's cold or distant. It means she's in control of her emotional ecosystem. She's learned to regulate herself, to self-soothe, and to detach from toxic patterns. She won't engage in emotional tug-of-wars or seek validation in places that once made her feel small. If she's back, it's not because she needs you to complete her. It's because she believes she can now meet you whole. This evolved version of her has likely confronted the shadows she once tried to hide. She's taken a hard look at her own patterns, where she self-sabotaged, where she clung too tightly, or where she betrayed her own instincts for the sake of love. That inner reckoning wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Because now, she doesn't just want love, she wants alignment. She doesn't just want connection, she wants compatibility. She isn't here to settle for potential anymore. She's here to build something that matches her emotional maturity and mirrors her new sense of self-worth. You'll notice the difference in her energy. She no longer chases. She no longer waits for you to decide if you want her. She knows what she brings to the table, and she's no longer in a rush to prove it. The need to be chosen has been replaced with the desire to choose herself over and over again. That doesn't make her hard or unapproachable. It makes her aware of what she deserves, aware of the emotional labor she used to give without receiving, aware of the fact that love should feel safe, mutual, and deeply respectful. And while her heart may still hold affection, it's not the same naive hope that once fueled her. It's a refined kind of love, one that's no longer rooted in fantasy or old wounds. She's learned that love is not just about chemistry or passion. It's about emotional safety, spiritual alignment, and the freedom to be fully oneself. So if you're hoping to reconnect, know that the rules have changed. She's not looking to relive the past. She's only interested in what honors her present and supports her future. Reuniting with this new version of her requires a different kind of presence. You must meet her where she is now, not where she was then. You must be willing to see her fully, not through the lens of who she used to be, but for who she's become. Because she won't shrink again to fit a love that no longer fits her. She won't repeat lessons she's already learned, and she won't let the old dynamics resurface without addressing them head on. You want to be part of her life now? You must show up as the version of yourself that's grown too. In truth, when women come back, it's never random. It's not weakness, confusion, or desperation. It's layered. It's intentional. It often carries the weight of reflection, healing, self-discovery, and maturity. Whether she returns to stay, to say goodbye with clarity, to confront the past, or to see if a love can be rebuilt on stronger ground, it is always an act of courage. But here's what must be understood. The woman who returns is not the same woman who walked away. She has been through an emotional rebirth. She has wrestled with her doubts, confronted her pain, and realigned with her value. She is no longer available for half love, for emotional guessing games, or for relationships that don't honor her full expression. Her return is a mirror. It reflects not only her growth, but the growth required of you. So if a woman returns to your life, don't assume she's come back to pick up where things left off. Look closer, listen deeper, ask yourself whether you are meeting her as the man she once knew or as the one she hoped you would become. Because her return is not just a second chance for love, it's a test of readiness, respect, and recognition. In the end, it's not about why women always come back. It's about who they become when they do. And whether you're ready for her now that she knows exactly who she is.